Welcome to the Week in Italian Startup, where we discuss the latest highlights happening in the Italian tech and investment ecosystem. Let's start from Daze, a startup developing smart chargers for electric vehicles, raising 15 million in a Series A round led by CDP Venture Capital with the participation of the European Investment Fund, Funders Future, and Prana Ventures. So this deal is interesting on a few levels, I would say. So first of all, of course, they are riding sort of the electrification wave of cars and what's going to happen in the future, but they're taking it in a very precise angle, which is essentially how to make like charger extremely widespread, well designed, and easy to install in the home, but not only in the home, of course. So the company is relatively young. They've been, they're probably like fighting with some big players for sure, but they're solving this very, very specific problem. So I thought, I thought it was a good deal just because it's a very interesting way to add value to like some existing trend that is clearly taking place and will keep growing essentially for the future. What is your take on this, Nick?
Yeah, I agree with you. This is part of a different trend of investments in the VC world in hardware companies or hardware platform companies. That's something that's probably was a bit more unusual in the last few years, uh, and of course in a very hot segment of the market, the clean tech and energy part. Um, I, I actually been knowing the company for quite a while, so I'm not surprised that they raised a sizable Series A because they are very good, with clear vision, very good founders. So I'm very happy that they managed to raise this round and an international round at that. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, the list of investors includes CDP of course, but also Founders Future, French investor. I think at the first deal in Italy.
I think so. In the past years, that's probably the first time we see. I was pretty surprised too. And talking about actually sort of the strategy post raise, I think the idea here is really to focus on growth, especially outside of Italy. So probably like Germany, France. So it makes perfect sense to actually have these kind of investors that can actually open the market that are not Italy. So that's a very, very interesting move. Just to give more context, so CDP basically invested through the energy tech compartment of the Corporate Partners One fund and the Green Transition Fund. So, as we all know, CDP is like is a little bit of a labyrinth when it comes to vehicles, accelerator, and funds. The basically the Corporate Partners One has been like very, very active, and basically what they do is they involve a lot of big corporations to actually participate as LPs. And then they have different compartments with different focus. So this is interesting, as this is probably like one of the very, very well established and active entities in the CDP ecosystem, I would say. Yeah, what is interesting also, I would say, is that when it comes to product, and they were mentioning, aside from the expansion to essentially like Spain and France, as we were mentioning, is the fact of making this product as usable and as close to the everyday activities of people when it comes to product. So they want to develop what I found particularly curious, which is like bi-directional charging, which is vehicle to home and vehicle to grid, in a way to actually support the building of a full ecosystem of an electrified smart house. So it's not just pumping out energy out of the grid, is somehow sort of getting it back once maybe at some point cars will be able to produce electricity on their own or something like that. I mean, it's a pretty visionary, I would say, in that sense.
Yeah.
All right, let's move to bending spoons. So, of course, we have to talk about this. Bending Spoon confirmed the 155 million funding round, basically reporting a 2.55 billion post-money valuation. Okay, let's start from your first impression, Nick, and then we can dig deeper both in the investment, the investors, and then I would say a little bit of the history of acquisitions and movements from Bending Spoon, which I think is particularly relevant at this point.
Well, my first impression is excellent, and too bad I'm not on that cap table. So I'm very sad about not being there, but very happy about the round.
It's
And
a good
Spoon
comment. It's a good point. It's a good point.
they showed they had like a behemoth. They're able to execute. They're able to build a product portfolio to become a major player in the mobile space. And I'm not surprised that they're pulling this out of the hat. So um, very nice operation, and interesting to have this type of company at this moment, showing that also Italy can, produce um, sizable companies in the digital space. So a good example to follow.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. So, just a few numbers for the listener that I wanted to sort of mention. So, in 2022, Bending Spoon closed with 100 million in revenue, with 27 million in EBITDA, and in 2023, they basically the unconfirmed revenue it should be around like 120 million roughly. And just to say that actually, there is a big debate whether Bending Spoon is still a startup or not, or it's kind of touching the private equity realm. With this level, at these levels of EBITDA, probably they're already pushing a little bit the boundaries there. But again, it's a matter of taxonomy. It's a great successful case at the end. So I mean, it's definitely worth mentioning in the tech space in Italy. So we don't really care, I think, about this taxonomy problem. Is the interesting thing is probably like to see a very successful company to grow as big as them in our ecosystem. I think that's really the big takeaway.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that you can safely call them a startup. It's a digital product company growing organically and by acquiring other companies, other products from Italy. So I think it is important to remember they are a product company in the digital space with international reach. We don't have many of them. So probably just a few that come to mind. So I think this is the most important thing to remember, and to try to take the goods from that and try to, maybe not replicate in the exact same way, but think it can be done.
Yeah, no, I agree. And let's maybe go back a little bit and see exactly the history, like really roughly for the listener. So basically, just some quick takeaways. Benning Spoon was founded in 2013. Basically, in Italy, of course, they went through 6 funding rounds, roughly. And essentially, what happened is that the total they raised up to today 755 million in funding total, which is pretty much split, and it's interesting, I think. And I want your opinion on this. Half of this is venture, and half of it is debt. So that's pretty much interesting. So to be precise, it's 339 million in venture of some sort, and 415 in debt. So a slight bias toward debt. And we've seen this in 2022, basically when Intesa intervened, just to basically to have this big venture debt before the acquisition of Evernote. So interesting play here. So we have like both like the venture part and the debt part, and that kind of strengthen, I think, a little bit the idea that yeah, it is a startup, but I agree with you. It's a digital product company. It's not. It's kind of like a stretch to call them a startup anymore. It's a very fast paced digital company, I would say, and the debt position probably like confirms also this like growth taxonomy that maybe we can take.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the last few years, they've been acquiring, making actually headline grade acquisitions. I mean, Evernote, Meetup, they are acquisition that resonates internationally. And I'm not surprised that they using leverage, they're using debt to also complete those acquisitions. I mean, from what the numbers they report, it's a cash flow positive company. So from operations, they have a very strong EBITDA, so they can serve the debt. Why not? If they can accelerate growth using some leverage, it's probably a good idea to do that. So
100%.
you say you call them venture rounds, but it's always a bit foggy whether they are actual venture rounds or just smaller growth rounds, private equity rounds, because of the size, of course, the state of the company, and the quality of the investors. So we don't see many pure play VC players, actually none in the cap table. There are investors that kind of also invest in venture capital. H14, for example, they probably exited the investment. Uh, but most of the others, they come from the private equity world. So, and I'm not surprised because if the company has been a positive, maybe mostly since the beginning, the best actor to understand the quality, the quantity of capital that to inject in a company that has to grow mostly strategically, acquiring new products and expanding the capital in that way. Where private equity players are much more, uh, much better at understanding that type of play. So I think they're also better investors than pure
Yeah,
play
no,
VC
that's a great
investors.
point. And let's talk about their strategy before maybe digging a little bit deeper into their investor. So the strategy was pretty much since 3 years ago or 4 years ago is basically one acquisition a year, roughly. So that's a pattern, I would say. So starting, just to give some history, from Filmic Pro, I think that was the first time when we saw actually like an acquisition play from them, and then moving to Evernote in 2022, which is basically associated with this big round of debt financing, essentially about 340, basically led by Intesa San Paolo and BPM Bank in 2022. And then we have, of course, I think one company in the delivery space in 2023.
Yeah, a
Uh,
small one. That one I never understood that acquisition.
yeah, yeah, no, I agree.
talent,
Worth
talent
mentioning,
people. I don't know. That's one of my curiosity lurking
Yeah.
on the back of my mind.
And then finally, of course, 2024 with Meetup, and that's really the big the latest one. So yeah,
Mosaic apps.
absolutely
That
Mosaic
no,
Apps.
nobody knows about mosaic apps, but from the news, it's $100 million acquisition.
And
So
it's this year as well, right? So
this year,
this year is Meetup and Mosaic, I think. Cool. And yeah, I mean, there is a pattern here. So question number one, like, what's going on in 2000 and 25 at this point? Because or maybe at the end of this year, I would say. I mean, at this point is pretty interesting to see how exactly the pattern. So the pattern is really, as we were mentioning before in other episode, like acquiring, having the management team taking over, cleaning up the company essentially, and making it as efficient as possible through internal resources. So let's not forget that there has been some layoff, of course, of the old team, both for Evernote, and probably is going to happen the same for Meetup as well. But that's kind of natural when it comes to an M&A play, I would say. So I don't think there is nothing to be shocked about, and they're really on their like path to actually grow and grow and keep growing, really.
Mm. But you asked a good question. What's going to happen this year, next year, in 2 years? Uh, we don't know. We can only speculate. But once you have private equity players on the cap table, you know that you will have some liquidity events. So it's either or. It either one opportunity is you go for a really big private equity player, KKR. I'm just
Yeah,
throwing out names just for the
yeah.
sake of example. And KKR takes over all the private equity positions of the other smaller players, and it takes it from there, and it becomes a big platform. Think about Constellation, but for the mobile space. Or the other play might be an IPO, even
Yeah.
though the current market is a
Talking
bit,
about this, let's before any speculation, which I think it's sustained, and I'll tell you why in a second. Let's talk about the
okay.
investors because it's very interesting to see exactly the cap table right now. Starting from durable capital partners, so essentially that's I think it's the new entrant, right? I would say durable capital.
Yes, they are
Yeah.
the new one.
Yeah, so they are basically focused on small and mid cap private and public companies. And again, it is a hint on where exactly they're going. As we talked before, Bay Gifford, of course, another huge multi-billion player in the asset management space, public and private. So another another green flag over here. Cox Enterprise, very interesting, as we were mentioning. So it's a big telco US company, more than 100-year old. They've been they also have their tech and digital arm, so that's pretty interesting as well to have them as an investor. And then a few Italians talking about NB Renaissance, which is mostly focused on private equity. And I didn't know that, but it was basically a spin-off of San Paolo Private Equity. So it's really connected with banking, investment banking in particular. And then let's mention for sure Nuo Capital, and Startip, both Italian investor. Nuo Capital, basically, they have, I think, 7 investments. So it's kind of a smaller company, I would say, when it comes to investments. And then Startip, which is the startup arm of Tambur Investimenti, which is one of the big private equity player in Italy, I would say. So this is pretty interesting. Well, Tambor is pretty interesting as well, I would say, because they've been very active between 1921. Then they kind of didn't do much in 22. 23, it's kind of restarting again, and they have a total of 19 investments. Yeah, basically ranging on a wide variety of companies that are not necessarily digital. Imagine, I think also in the start they also have like Talent Garden and Basel and OVS as well in their portfolio. And funny enough, it's probably like more private equity side, but it's interesting because they're very capable in identify like extremely interesting deals in Italy. So definitely worth mentioning. So that's cool. So Nick, one thing which I thought was very interesting, and you would like it. So if we count the total of IPO of deals that went IPOs that are part of these these investors, so we just add the total IPO that went IPO through or thanks or somehow as part of their portfolio. I think the total is, if I'm not mistaken, about 56. So that's interesting because in more details, let me give you some data, which I think it was cool. So essentially, of course, by Gifford, they were into like 36 IPO, and they invested in 48 unicorns. So again, by the regular classification of what a unicorn is. Let's also the other one, which basically had a very interesting track record, is Durable Capital, 11 IPOs and invested in 21 unicorn. So again, putting things one after the other, the IPO track record, that's undeniable for sure, I would say.
Yeah,
So that's kind of a thread that kind of moves forward, and yeah, definitely sustain the hunch that we were talking about a few episodes ago about Bending Spoon soon going IPO, and
yeah.
that's definitely.
Sooner or later, I mean, their shareholders know to play the game, so they might
Yeah.
play the game.
Exactly.
I'm really curious.
Interesting. Yeah. Any final mentions, Nick, that you found interesting in the past week?
No, it wasn't a very busy week. I would say congratulations to the Cosmico team for the first acquisition. So this is a startup that raised a small Series A round last year, I believe, and expanding their growth trajectory by starting to acquire other companies. So always good to see. And not much else. Everybody talked about Y Combinator updating the list of interesting verticals. And I was amused that in these verticals there were like boring back office operations that need to be automated. That's interesting. But it's a long list, so take a look if you need ideas to launch a startup. So good starting point. And that's it, I would say.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for joining. And then at this point, I'll see you next week for the latest updates.
Ciao, Jack. See you in a week. Ciao, everybody.